After simming a few seasons in OOTP 24, I feel like I have a better grasp of some of the settings that I would recommend when starting your new save, and I'm going to show you using the new save I'm starting today. So I'm assuming for the purposes of this that you're going with an MLB start. This is a live start. You could start at the beginning of the season, but this is very much tailored towards modern day MLB saves rather than doing something historical. I've just never really played a lot of historical games, and I think there's a lot of very different settings, and you know, fictional, depending on how you want your league to play, probably the same there. So assume for the purpose of this that it's all MLB and kind of adjust from there if you're not playing that way. I think probably either way you can look at under global settings, and I think any fan in baseball, I would say you've probably heard about the 20 to 80 scale. 20 to 80 is 20 is basically a scrub, the very worst player imaginable. It is somebody who, like, a 20 sprint speed is somebody that you could probably find, working at your job, much less in Major League Baseball. And 80 is the fastest player imaginable. We're talking Ricky Henderson. That's the scale. 50 is league average, and then every step up is a standard deviation in either direction. It's really useful. I think it's more realistic. If you look at different, say, prospect rating websites, they go on a 20 to 80 scale. The only sort of unrealistic aspect in OOTP is that you actually get more information there with grades like a 35, whereas you'd usually only get like a 30 or 40 from most scouts. So overall, I think it's really good and just a lot more realistic. I think it makes you think of baseball rather than something else. You could maybe go like 1 to 20 if you were coming from Football Manager or Eastside Hockey Manager or something like that, and you just wanted to adjust a little bit more easily. But for your game experience, I'd highly recommend 20 to 80 for all of the ratings, including overall and potential ratings, and setting those to increments of 5, because getting a 57 is just weird. It should either show 55 or 60 depending on your scout. Just stick with this and trust me on it. Over time you'll get used to it, and then you'll wonder, how you ever left. So I always turn off all player ratings are displayed relative to. Several years ago, this caused a bug where you would get scouting reports that basically your main screen, the main player profile, would differ from the scouting reports, and it was caused by this. It just wasn't synced up properly, and I never went back to try and see if the bug was fixed. I just keep it turned off because it doesn't really add much value to me. I think it might help in certain cases, probably minor league management or independent leagues, something like that. But if you're doing MLB, you're safe to just turn this off. Let's see. I keep the coaching system, everything the same. Down here at the very bottom, I'm turning off owner goals for the first time in a long time this year because I don't think that the upgrade really made a positive difference. I think it was pretty lateral at best. And, if I got really far in a save and I'm looking for a new challenge, I would enable owner goals. If I were starting a save with, say, the Dodgers or the Yankees, where you've got infinite money and a nice farm system, yeah, raise the difficulty a little bit. I'm starting as the Royals here, and we need all the help and fewer limitations, the better. I also turn on GM-only users are always in control of lineups and hiring. This isn't strictly necessary because there are both GM only, manager only, and GM and manager at the same time modes. I prefer this because then I can play as a GM but still set lineups, and that's to model more of the modern front office where the GM is the one setting the tone and managers tend to have less control these days, and I want the AI to have less control. I have a better idea of lineup selection than they do. And rather than, I don't know if development wise it changes anything. Maybe some people have done some studies on it. But in general, I'd rather have a manager for development purposes and also for a little extra realism, I guess. Generally, yeah, you could get by without it, but it's my preference for sure. It's probably the only thing on here that I would say isn't a hard requirement in the same way that others are. And with that, that tackles everything on the global settings. Under players and team, I'm leaving injuries as normal in this year. I think it actually has changed the default back down to normal frequency rather than what it used to be was high for realistic modern day. I think everybody just knows that it's not that fun. Once again, from a difficulty standpoint, it's much better, but in this kind of save, I don't want the extra difficulty just yet. Maybe if I play it for 20 years and I've won a couple World Series, sure. Height injury rating is a nice difficulty enhancement too, but I think it generally just makes you do a little bit more work looking at injury history, and for the sake of a game, I wouldn't recommend it, but a good difficulty setting there. I also enable show player personality ratings on the profile page. This makes managing team chemistry a lot more simple. You don't have to go and try and guess who a captain is or a spark plug or a leader. It just shows you right on the profile. And you don't have to create any custom views for it. It just shows 100% of the time. Player development settings, I changed the aging speed down to 0.8, which is a 20% reduction in aging. The short version of a long explanation is that OOTP does a really good job of modeling the average aging curve in a league, but you don't get as many outliers, and you don't have the players who rack up 3,000 hits or 500 or 600 home runs. You just don't get that longevity, and it is less fun that way. I want to see, guys play with the same team till they're 40, or a guy who's 42 and still hitting 20 home runs as a designated hitter. It's just more fun for me, so I turn aging speed down. In the last couple of games, I've kept dev speed the same and haven't noticed any real change. So I think that's safe to leave as is. The talent change randomness starts at 100. That's basically, a little bit of entropy, how much you want in your player ratings. I changed mine to 125. That's down a little bit from previous seasons where I would settle in at 130 to 150. I just noticed a little bit more in 23 and a little bit in 24. I think this seems about right. It still lets you get late bloomers or prospects who flame out or pitchers who flame out for reasons other than injury, things like that. I think it is really just better that way. It keeps you on your toes and makes the game a little bit more fun. I think it also makes it a little bit more interesting and difficult than something like Football Manager, where player development is pretty linear and pretty predictable because of it. And despite accidentally clicking on this, I do not disable any of these development settings here unless there's some weird bug that I just haven't heard about this year, but I think it's safe. There's nothing really you need to change for face gen. Under AI settings, though, this is a matter of personal preference. I like to go about 75% of the way on hard in favor of prospects, and adjust it a little bit more. I would say the trade AI was better this year, so I was able to drop this down, whereas in past years I would have it all the way up. But it felt good. But on the very hardest settings, it was a little too tough to trade players. And that didn't feel quite realistic either, to get an all-star who had a bit of a down year and he's completely untouchable. Likewise, for favor prospects, if you have it all the way up, that's the better difficulty setting if you're trying to make things harder for yourself. But then you won't be able to trade for You won't be able to get prospects in return for your all-stars or your regular starters. You won't get anybody at all. And sometimes even asking for an organizational player like a 24-year-old with a good fastball and nothing else, the AI will value them more than your starting second baseman. It gets a little too weird otherwise. So I find this is about the range, but feel free to adjust that a little bit here or there. Hard mode for trading, another difficulty setting. I played around with it in a previous save and just didn't enjoy it. I wasn't able to get kind of realistic feedback, I would say. Like if you end up in a lot of scenarios where a player, let's say a pitching prospect who's rated like 45 out of 80, so average to below average, but you think they've got good movement or they've got a really nice changeup, whatever it is, you want to see, take a flyer on them. The AI may value them very lowly. They may think that they're really just a reliever, or they may think that they're their top pitching prospect. And you have no idea. And submitting offers and then having to wait a day or two and sim and step forward, it's just annoying. It definitely makes things more difficult, but it didn't make things more enjoyable. So I have this turned off. I have kept the reputation system on because I think that is a little bit better way to get around the kind of cheesy way. And I, call it that because I did it for years and years of trying to get just one more prospect, trying to get one more reliever, or trying to get their backup catcher who has 80 catcher ability and 70 arm, but, nothing else. Maybe he'll develop, a bat at some point. It's very easy to obsess over and try and min-max the optimal trade deal. And it's easy to build really good farm systems that way. But then getting something that you have to submit and then you complete the trade or else your reputation's harmed. And then that means you don't get as many offers or you have to then offer more to get the same player. I think that's a nice compromise. And I think that seems better to me than hard mode. Trade deadline, I haven't played around with this too much. I would say 4 or 5 minutes seems about right, and you don't need that many steps. You just don't end up making that many deals in my experience. So I don't have any changes to suggest there besides that. And then last is league settings. So these are the recommended changes, I would say. These are more personal preference. Everything else is, based on my experience of what makes a save better. These are things that I think make a save better, but they're not necessarily requirements, and your taste is probably a bit different than mine. So I'll probably go through a little bit more quickly on these, and you can kind of take them or leave them. So under league settings, the rules, I will change this expanded roster size to 30. 28 just seems too low to me. Likewise on here, I can't do it because the season hasn't ended yet, but I set the minimum batters faced back to 1, modified extra innings back to spring only, no ghost runner, nothing like that. Allow spring ties in spring, that's fine. It's spring training, it doesn't matter. Under financials, I am turning off the compensation this year. Just the more I've played around with it, the AB system is really interesting. Like if you've read Moneyball and wondered how Oakland got so many picks, it was because of the old system based off of tiers of free agents, and you could get up to a first round draft pick and a supplemental pick for one player if they were good enough. That's really exciting if you like that sort of draft emphasis and you're working on a low budget team. Otherwise, I just find that you're a little too restricted, and the AI is even a little restricted with the qualifying offer system, which is the purpose in real life, but this is a game. Just make it more fun. So I'm going for no compensation this year. Under options, a lot of people will tell you to disable league evolution. I I think that's a good idea. I think a better idea is to turn off everything except for the more or less offense or more or less pitching. Everything else is obnoxious. The expansion never goes to the cities you think it should. Same with team location. Nickname changes are random and they're annoying. You end up having to basically go back. The active roster size and the secondary roster size, they can get really frustrating. I had one save where it dropped the active roster size down to 24 at one point. That just sucks. IL length is, kind of here nor there. It doesn't really make a big difference. DH defines your entire team building. Minimum service, if you go to 5 years, let's say, or that seems to be a pretty good balance and a way to make things a little bit more challenging. But I've had saves where it went up to 7 years before free agency, and it was just way too easy to retain your talent and build a dynasty. You can also change the award names in here for things like, the Great Glove, change it to the Gold Glove because OOTP doesn't have those licensing rights. So you can make those changes in here. Also in here, I changed spring training to 6 weeks just to give a little bit of extra time, get a few more players some innings or at-bats. The playoffs, I can't customize in here because of, still in the middle of them. In general, I would recommend changing them to something that is just better than the current system. Once again, personal preference. I recommend either going back to the old single wild card, or if you want an expanded playoffs, I really like having three wild cards, so 6 teams per league, doing 2 buys for the top 2 teams by record, and having a 3-game wild card series that are all hosted at the higher seeds, so they have home field advantage for a 3-game series. And then after that, a 7-game ALDS. This would be like a Fox dream to get that many more playoff games. But I think it takes a little bit of the randomness out. So if you're building really good teams and you get tired of losing in game 5 of the ALDS every single year, which is such an OOTP meme because it happens in almost every save at some point, I find that makes it a little bit more palatable, so that you're not going out in the wild card series, or hopefully if you're losing, it's in the LCS, and it's a lot less frustrating that way in my experience. Lastly, players, or almost lastly, players on here. I haven't changed the international amateur settings. I think that's fine. You end up with about 4 per team. Eventually, the hard international cap keeps the level playing field, but if you really want to emphasize kind of, farm system development, then you can remove that. International per team, that works pretty well for me. I think I could even go to, I wish there were a setting between the two. 2 per year seems too few. 8 seems a little much, but I think this is fine. International established free agents. So these are players who are usually in their 20s or 30s. They don't have a history. They're not linked to a particular league. So like in this case, you're seeing a lot of players from Cuba or Taiwan, where you don't have playable leagues. I recommend either going to none or going to more or a lot. The reason is a lot of them are players who are organizational players. They will stick around AA or AAA. A good year might be a utility guy who comes in. But every once in a while, there'll be a player who's an absolute superstar, like can win a batting title or, hits 30 home runs and has 75 grade defense in center field. Something, pretty crazy like that. Those players can break the game, and it's kind of annoying that they don't have even a fake history generated because of it. If you want that kind of randomness, go for a lot. If you want to increase the difficulty and make it a little bit harder and a little bit more realistic, because those guys don't really come out of nowhere to that degree, go to none. Likewise for the independent leagues, although that always feels even weirder to me because you're usually looking at like a 26-year-old guy from Wisconsin and no one's ever heard about him, but now he's an all-star. Same sort of problem. I turn those off 100% of the time because without having even that fake college history or fake minor league history, it's just not. It breaks the immersion for me a little bit. So in that case, yeah, extreme, none or a lot here, and none here. And then lastly, stats and AI, and this may be well, I don't know if this is that controversial compared to the free agent ones. I turn catcher framing down to 0. And the reason is I want robo-umps. And the more game-focused reason is that you otherwise have a very limited scope of what you can do for a catcher. You have to optimize for defense in that case. And that means catcher ability. And even though the impact has been nerfed a little bit compared to previous games, you still just over optimize for defense first. And I really want the option to have a bat first catcher, or to make the trade-off between defense and offense. And by removing the catcher framing impact, it comes down to pass balls and arm. And, there's still a lot of defense there, but it's much more it's in the same sort of impact, the same sort of order of magnitude, whereas defense just always overshadowed it. And I mean, there are positions like that in baseball. Catcher is one, shortstop's another, but I mean, shortstop, you even saw the modern trend of going for guys who are hopefully average or below average, but made up for it with the bat. Or you could choose the guy who was all glove and, had a, 40 outs above average or something crazy stupid like that. You actually had a choice, whereas in catcher you didn't. So I turned that off. I want to mimic robo-umps and have more variety. I want catchers who hit 30 home runs a year. So yeah, that is my personal choice there. And that wraps up all of my recommendations and then my personal taste for the other settings. So if you think any of those are a good idea, my ego would appreciate it. And if you think those are terrible ideas, then feel free to leave the comment and help my engagement. I'll appreciate the dopamine from the notification. So let me know what you think, and if you have any suggestions based off your OOTP 24 experience. Until then, happy simming.